number 4 is good.
Bonjour, merci d'être là ce matin, merci d'avoir attendu légèrement que ceux qui espéraient une place libre puissent rentrer. Merci au musée de la Chasse et de la Nature de nous recevoir, qui sont nos voisins également de palier 79 des archives, puisque leur administration est à côté de chez nous. On est très amis avec eux et on aime beaucoup ce musée, pour ceux qui ne le connaîtraient pas, là-haut. Now I'm going to turn to English. I'm sorry for you. Thank you very much for this museum to welcome us, and it's quite an interesting museum. For those of you that don't know it, you should sometime pay the time of the visit upstairs. It's a museum it's about hunting and nature, but they also very regularly invite contemporary artists or even photographers. Sophie Carl had a very successful show here, when they have to do with nature and eventually hunting. So we're happy to be here. We're happy to be here with Martin, that in a very, very busy week, as he always has, as he's chosen to give us 1 hour time with you. We were going to have I have some questions, so that we've been friends for the past 40 years. I still have some questions to ask him. And it's always a chance for the public, so you can channel the questions somehow through you to him. Things you don't always do every day, so it's always a pleasure to be able to raise the big issues here on stage. This meeting occurs because we have the exhibition at the Cartier-Bresson Foundation called Reconciliation, as you can see behind me, between Henri Cartier-Bresson and Martin Parr. Probably we could have put interrogation point after reconciliation, because again, last night I was in a dinner, and good old friends came to me one after the other one and say, how can you think they could ever reconciliate? For me, it's not a question for a long time, but Martin will explain his point of view about this. But the show probably give us some clues to where the common ground is more than one would think before that show. And that show all started because we found an incredible treasure, which was unknown from the foundation, or at least left aside, which is a film where Cartier-Bresson was assigned in 1962 to take pictures in the north of England of English people at work and on the beach when they go for leisure, in similar places where Martin Parr went in 1985, which ended up in the book in 1986 called The Last Resort. I had the chance at the time to show this work in Arles, which was probably one of the first times in Europe. And that's also when the controversy about the work of Martin started. For those that didn't pay the attention to what was there growing as a real vision of where photography should go and what the role of photography is. And this is maybe what we're going to investigate this morning. So the show is over there. We're going to have a 40-minute talk, then I'll give the floor to any of you that has questions. And then if you're interested, we will move to the Cartier-Bresson Foundation, where Martin will be available for signing books. If anyone wants to find books, we have a bookstore there, obviously, especially with the catalogue of the show, which is here, which has 2 entries: the English by Martin Parr, Les Anglais, or Les Anglais, by Henri Cartier-Bresson.
And we meet halfway.
And au milieu, halfway, you have the 2 faxes that explain the origin of the controversy. Anyway, the controversy started, Martin, when you were already a photographer going up in his fame and in his work. You had various projects behind you. There was The Last Resort, there was a cost of living, there was Sign of the Times, all these dealing with the way of life of English people in your kind of a direct way and very intrusive way, but also always interacting with the people in a very kind and gentle way. What came to your mind to have the will to join Magnum? Because that was a time, we're back in 1989, because Martin applied for Magnum in 1989 and finally entered Magnum 5 years later. Usually a photographer is 4 years purgatory for Magnum, he got 5. And at the time, the market of photography was starting to build itself, and some photographers would more choose to go into galleries than to go in a photo agency. What came to your mind, Martin?
I think I wanted to join Magnum because I liked the idea of a cooperative. I knew quite a few photographers in Magnum, especially the English ones like David Hearn, Christopher Perkins. And I just liked the idea of having someone looking after my licensing, getting the pictures out. It's not something that I particularly was good at. I didn't have the contacts. And also, I wanted to work for magazines. I just liked the idea of getting the work out through different platforms to many more people than I would have done had I not joined Magnum. So that's the thing that motivated me. And as you well know, the first application was '89. And from the word go, as you've indicated, the work caused a lot of controversy within Magnum. There was a core of people who was led by Philip Jones Griffiths, the esteemed...
An English photographer himself.
Welsh.
Fortunately not Scotch.
Yes, it was led by him, and it's difficult to underestimate how fierce his criticism was. He called me a fascist. He called me, part of Mrs. Thatcher's band. I mean, he found the worst insults possible to sort of throw at me. And then, of course...
He usually was very funny, but I mean...
he was a very funny guy.
He was devastating as well, yeah.
And a very good photographer. Interestingly, in the first, say, 12 years of my career, I worked in black and white. Because if you're a photographer in the early 70s, that's really what you did. The photography wasn't really the colour domain. If you're a colour photographer, you were doing advertising or family snaps. And I did actually a workshop with Philip Jones Griffiths, maybe in 1975, something like that. And we got on extremely well. This is when I was doing my black and white work.
You were doing a workshop as a photographer? Or?
Yes, I was like an assistant photographer. Okay. He was the sort of lead guy, because I wasn't so well known then. But the irony is that we got on extremely well. So it wasn't actually our inability to talk and communicate to each other, although after I tried to join Magnum, he never spoke to me again. He just avoided me. And yes, in a sense, I sort of look back at all this now, and I think the controversy that this work, basically generated is not a bad thing, because probably still now the work that I did in, it was published in '86, is probably still my most popular body of work.
The Last Resort.
That's right, yeah.
You told me that you're selling 2,000 copies a year of that book. I mean, when I started in photography, which is more or less at that time, in the 80s, 2,000 copies was a book would sell over 2 years for famous photographers. And you're still selling 2,000 copies of one book out of the 120 you published.
That's right.
It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm a very promiscuous photographer, I accept that. But yeah, and it's on its 7th edition or something like that. We just keep reprinting it. So it's like it's better than a pension really, because it keeps on going. And it'll actually generate income when I'm dead, which is quite nice to think. Because, I too, like Cartier-Bresson, have a foundation, and we need to think about how to fund this and keep it going after my demise.
We'll come to the foundation later as well.
Come to my death later, yeah.
So you entered Magnum, you became a heavy contributor to Magnum, because Magnum photographers have to give part of what they earn to get the tool. Magnum is a tool. People have a lot of fantasy about Magnum, but it's actually a working tool. So you became a heavy contributor for Magnum, along with Cartier-Bresson, I would say. And more than Philip Jones Griffiths.
Much more than Philip, yes. That gives me some satisfaction.
And then you became president of Magnum, and a very influential one to your brother photographers. So you're fully into the Magnum now. But what is your the conclusion of your experience after now being 30 years at Magnum. I mean, what did it bring to you, and was that a mistake or for your career, if that is a good word?
No, it's been a fantastically beneficial relationship that I've had. You know, getting the work out, the licensing. You know, I'm the sort of top licenser because people like, you know, I make colourful, bright, brash pictures, and you know, most of us don't have much taste, and therefore they're very appealing. And you know, that's the secret why, you know, Japanese companies want my images on T-shirts, and you know, someone from America say, "We'll put your image on a bag." And at the foundation,
do you have a cafe in Japan like Chris Marker and La Jetée, or not yet?
No, not yet. But,
well, we should do it in Paris.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you retire, you can organise that for me.
Oh, that's 2 weeks from now.
Right. We have a deal. Yeah. So I like the idea of photography being high and low culture. You know, I have pictures in the Tate. I have pictures in the Museum of Modern Art. But I like the fact you can print a zine, say, on the cheapest, trashiest paper, and it still functions as an image. So that whole promiscuity, the fact that photography is high and low culture, really appeals to me, and Magnum can help me, you know, achieve that, because I haven't got the time to sort of be dealing with someone in Russia or wherever and working out what the fee would be for that licensing question.
I remember when we were young, one of the first things we did, that was the beginning of printing on large formats, this kind of things, that you did a flower show project, and you wrapped up a bank main office with flowers by you.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Was, I think, a total failure. I think the technique wasn't good enough at the time, but we could do it again. Anyway, you mentioned the Last Resort book. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I saw the Last Resort come out is we were at the time in a kind of seek for recognition of photography by the institutions. When publishers would do photography, they would do the pages white, and in the middle a photograph framed by white, like if it was a frame itself. There was something a bit heavy and sort of they wanted to be classic. I mean, photography wanted to be sort of looking alike the art as you see it in general in catalogs. When you did The Last Resort, it was a softcover book, not a hardcover book, and you left a lot of space to the graphic designer. I mean, you even gave him the cover of your book, which I admired a lot. And within the book, we even had some little pink and yellow and bluish design in it facing your pictures. I love that. I thought it was very smart. You also had already postcards in the Last Resort book within the text, illustrating what the beach of New Brighton was. But when you republished the 7 times, the Last Resort, you're now in a much more conventional layout. How come? It's a hardcover, there's a picture on the cover. It's actually the picture that we used in 1986 for our workshops in Arles. They do kids licking ice creams. And then you don't have a little graphic designs in it. And why did you cut back on this?
I mean, the colourful design was really part of the sort of the time, you know, it's 80s graphics. So I quite like the idea of just updating it. I mean, there are plenty of books that I've made still that have interesting production ideas within them. So I think we just wanted to have something, a new text, which explained how the history of The Last Resort had been viewed by the photographic culture, and just to do a sort of classical design. Can I just answer the other question we didn't deal with? I think in terms of Magnum, I think one of the things that really happened after my entry is it meant that different photographers could join Magnum. So it was a time when you didn't just have the humanistic photojournalist, which is a traditional sort of ground for Magnum photographers. You know, you had people like Alice Sows, Antoine Dagatar, you know, a new generation of documentary photographers. They're still interested in telling stories about their rendition of the world and how they see it. But the way they do it is really sort of expanded. And I think if that hadn't happened, you know, like all the other agencies, you know, we wouldn't still be there. Because when you look at the death of the agencies that relied on the magazine market, we realise that they've all gone. You know, it's very difficult to survive. You can't live off magazine markets alone. And even Magnum, we still obviously do editorial, but it's the digital department with things like the square print sale that has actually helped Magnum to still be here and survive. So sorry about that, I forgot to answer that one before.
I guess we could have 2 hours about Magnum, the two of us, but I mean, this is not exactly the point. But going back to book publishing, I mean, you publish, I mentioned before, you said, I mean, you don't even seem sure of how many books you have published.
No, I must count them sometime, yeah. It's on my site, so if anyone's interested, we show all the books, although we're about 3 months late in uploading.
And quite a few interesting films as well. But, I mean, there are books of various categories, because I've seen you producing books incredibly quickly, and some are, and at the same time you were mentioning that there was only one retrospective book, which is the Fiden big book, though this came out more than 10 years ago. So how come we don't have more transversal books about your work, which I think would be very interesting, because what people, when you know one of your works, like Last Resort, which has been seen by so many people, we can have one idea of what your interest in photography is, where actually I think it has many, many forms. So do you think that will be the last retrospective book you will do?
No, I think Fiden will eventually update it. I mean, that's really their obligation, because if they don't, maybe in a couple of years' time, I'll think it's time to sort of really do the update, and if they don't, then I can go to another publisher. But in the meantime, I mean, we still have the expanded edition is in your shop. It's big and pink and yellow. It's brash and bright, like all things that I enjoy, as you know.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes some orthodox people in the photography business think that you're doing book like products. One is about people in their cars. One is about Paris with this map of Paris kind of cover. It seems like you could produce a book by going back to your archive and putting pictures together that not necessarily had to do in the first place, and that you're producing a product and not necessarily a photographer's book. What is your relationship to the book?
I guess my main motivation in my last 50 years is really to sort of build up this archive, particularly about the United Kingdom, that sort of tell us about my relationship to the country, how I've observed it, how society has changed. And because I have, say, like 52,000 high-res images on the Magnum site, all keyworded, all ready to download, it means if you say to me tomorrow, I'm doing a show on dogs, have you got 50 pictures, I'll be able to give them to you, because I just like photographing. I go out all the time.
You want to challenge Elliot Erwitt. You should do that.
Yes. So, the archive that has built up on the Magnum site is really, perhaps the most important thing. And there's still aspects of British society that I've yet to explore, but I think most of the things, most different classes, I've done the working class, middle class, of which I'm obviously a member, the upper classes, I've done the traditions in the City of London, which are very archaic. So I'm constantly looking for...
You did deco as well?
Sorry?
You did deco as well?
Deco?
Decorating, I mean,
yes.
the inside of people's home,
right.
yeah?
People's relationship to their homes, and indeed people's relationship to their cars. So yes, it's very important to me to think of my legacy as being this archive, which will be accessible through Magnum, of course, and for people to come and do research at the Martin Parr Foundation.
But you say it's all about England. It's actually not all about England, because there's that project about the commuters in Japan that sleep on the subway. There's a project about tourism, mass tourism around the world, which are people from all over the world that go for all this tourist experience that we have seen growing since the past 20 years. So it's not just about
England.
It's
not. I mean, it's a global thing, but I guess there are more British pictures than anything else. There's maybe half the archive is from Britain, and the rest is from the rest of the world. But I've been very lucky that photography has taken me to all the virtually every country in the world. It's been a fantastic experience, and people pay you to do this. And I still have to kick myself. Think, what a privileged life I lead. I'm doing my hobby, and people pay me to do it. It's fantastic.
That's not bad. Do you wait for these assignments nowadays to go on the work? Because you're so busy by doing books, taking care of your foundation for other British photographers, doing these books of books that have been incredibly successful and interesting. And for those that don't know what it is, it's the history of books through a selection of books that Martin collected and then gathered, enjoyed, and edited into a big book that tells you
three volumes, in fact.
Yeah, 3 volumes about the general story, plus the Chinese one, plus the Latino one you took part as well in. So this is 5 of them, right?
Yeah.
So you're incredibly busy. I mean, now when you take pictures, is that when you get an assignment, or are you still self-motivated by something? Or are you blasé?
Well, no, not really. I mean,
I knew I was going to ask that.
I have myeloma, which is a form of cancer. That slowed me down a bit, but I can still go out and photograph. And the summer, you know, like June, July, August, I really reserve for photographing in the UK. And the rest of the time, I'm happy to do consignments and projects. I mean, I don't get as many magazine assignments as I did before because the magazine market has declined, which is a cultural commission for a museum in Malaga where I'll be having a show next February. So it gives me a chance to, you know, with a good person who does the production, you can do an incredible amount of work in a week, which is that's the amount of time I spent there.
What is the part of print sales in your activity now these days? They were in Paris Photo Days. I mean, is print sales big for you?
It is pretty good, I have to admit. You know, the picture I have, I don't know if anyone has seen it, of the Queen from behind with her hat.
Love it.
You know, this is basically sold out.
Sorry, I brought Yusuf Kar's picture because you were there, but then you should have brought yours. I don't have it. So.
But yeah, that's done very well here at Paris Photo. So yeah, it's an important part of my income.
Do you number your pictures?
Yes, they're editioned after 1989. The good thing about that is that the last resort is not editioned, which means I can keep churning out prints and selling them. I don't know how many prints I've done of the last resort in the small size. It's a lot.
Okay.
And the black and white weren't editioned either. So because I was going into that sort of market of being represented by galleries, it became quite important to do the editioning. So we started out with 1 of 25, and now it's 1 of 10. With 1 of 5 of the bigger print.
Coming back to your relationship with Henri Cartier-Bresson, can you define it? I mean, the story of this violent exchange when the tourism show was in Paris and we were trying to enter Magnum is now the purpose of this show, so I guess everyone knows it or will see the show later. But well, in the long term, what was your relationship with Henri Cartier-Bresson?
I mean, it was fine. I mean, I remember being influenced by him when I was a teenager. He had an exhibition in London in 1969, which I really enjoyed. And, you know, of course you admire his ability to compose and the poetry that he can provide in images. So when I joined Magnum, you know, we would say hello and everything. He wasn't super friendly, but it was respectful. And I'd always bring in books for him to sign. I got him to sign my copy of The Decisive Moment, for example. And then after the you know, the argument or the spat, whatever you want to call it, and the efforts of Martin Frank to bring me round and have the lunch, we became a bit more friendly, in fact. So I guess in the end he accepted the fact that the members had voted me to be part of Magnum, and he has to respect that. You know, it's like a democracy. We have to really abide by what the democracy tells us, both in politics and in joining Magnum.
Very good. Magnum is very much a political arena in its own right. Do you think your work is close enough that we can talk about a reconciliation, or does that shows that your work isn't really totally different? Because the interesting thing with that show is it's like a play. When you have a play and 2 directors that are going to put the play on stage with 2 different settings, 2 different casting, and then the result is actually, though the text is the same, though the situations are the same, you get 2 very different shows. How close, how far do you think, and how would you define it from Henri's work and your work?
Well, I was quite surprised when I finally saw the exhibition up to see the similarities of our approach and techniques and the type of subject matter that we'd be interested in. And basically, it's exactly the same. And that, it's almost worrying, really. And I can see him, you know, he does his factory pictures. I can just see him walking around, and then there's someone with a hairnet on, which people used to wear back in the 60s, you know, getting the hair in your rollers, ready for the evening when you go out for a dance or whatever. And there'd be a picture of Elvis up on the wall. Of course, he would hone in on that with the woman, basically the relationship.
Yeah, Bon Jovi, not Elvis.
Bon Jovi.
Well, there is your own picture.
Yes. So I can see him, I can literally see, I understand exactly what he's doing when he's walking around. I do the same when he goes to Blackpool. I can see exactly why he's chosen certain things. He's found things on the beach, the donkeys, the ice cream cart, the tea cart, and you can see he's playing with the relationship. So the similarities between us in terms of photography approach were surprisingly similar. I mean, almost worryingly so. Did you find that a surprise?
Fortunately, you were 11 when the film was broadcasted in England, so otherwise we could have thought that you were inspired to the extent that you did the same thing. But I mean, and so you never knew about that film, right?
Let me tell you why I love seaside resorts so much. Because my parents were bird watchers, and therefore all our outings and all our holidays were to look for birds. Okay. So when we went to the seaside, we go to some boggy marsh where you'd find waders, and I never got to a seaside resort. So basically, for the rest of my life, I've been trying to catch up with what I missed out in terms of my childhood. That's why I love the beach so much. I can't keep away because I was deprived of it during my childhood.
That was very sad.
It's sort of sad, but it's interesting. It's a pure motive, and that's why, like a jackdaw being attracted to gold beads, that's why I can't help myself. Even now, I can't get over that.
What did your parents think of your very ironic work as a photographer?
Well, they were, to their credit, very supportive of my career, so I have no complaints about that, but that's why I love beaches. And I've always used the beach. I did a book about 4 years ago called Beach Therapy, excuse the pun, and there I explained that every time I had a new camera or a new way of exploring, I would go to the beach first as my laboratory, if you like. So when I had a macro lens with a ring flash, I went to the beach and photographed people very close up. When I had the first digital camera, I came back a bit. And then more recently, I've experimented with what's possible with a telephoto lens, looking at the beach. So I've always used it as a way of exploring different ways and different techniques. And it's always exciting when you have a new camera, a new format, a new way of working, to see what you can come up with, because the danger is that someone like me, you rely on your past palette, your past sort of ways of working, and you're not taking risks. So I think that's always helped me to sort of try and keep fresh and keep doing different and new things.
Well, I think this is very true. I mean, there's always a moment when you talk to photographers, they talk about techniques. That was the chapter. But I mean, the reality is, if you look at all the career of Martin, you'll see that it's not linear. I mean, you always have a different approach according to the projects you're embarking, and you really work differently, and the techniques are important because you pick them up according to what you want to achieve every time, and that's something that people who just has a superficial approach to your work don't necessarily understand, is on the length, how much your work has evolved. Do you think today you are as critical of the eccentricity of the society as you were before?
I mean, the good thing about my relationship to the UK is it's full of contradictions. I mean, I think that tension that I have, it's almost like a therapeutic thing, because we all love our own country, however bad it is. There's this funny thing that we always protect it and love it, and at the same time I can be very critical of the Brits, especially I'm appalled by Brexit, and we were forced into this. I don't know a single person who actually voted for Brexit, and yet we did, and it's been a total nightmare, and we all know that it's an absolute disaster. The politicians, even the opposition party, cannot actually admit that, even though the economy's gone down, our foundation, we have problems posting things to Europe. It's a total nightmare. And that's one of the things I'm really angry about, that all my fellow compatriots voted for Brexit. So when I'm out photographing, it is like a form of therapy. The things that I love, I like Radio 4, I like cups of tea, things that you don't get in France. And there are things, there's bigotry and snobism and the Brexiteers in England and Britain that I dislike. So it's tension, and that tension is a healthy thing for photographers, I think. But
let me say this, I'm surprised because, France has been supporting you quite a few. You got quite You got assignments to work when they were building the Channel Tunnel. You got quite a few grants in France, exhibitions. Prints were bought and sold. The yearbooks sell very well here. You always have a French publisher along with the English publisher. How come you never published a book about French eccentricity or snobism or whatever you would find characteristic of our nation?
I mean, the first thing to say is, yes, I'm much better known in France than I'm in England. And, you know, I've had many more shows in Paris than I've ever had in London. When I have a show here, people will review it.
You're like Woody Allen.
Well, no, because I'm not you know, I haven't got the dodgy side of Woody Allen. So I don't think I'm really like him. But so that's important. But the thing is, I cannot speak French. I'm linguistically hopeless.
We're very good at English now.
Yes, no, I've learned English, it's fine, I can get through with that. But, you know, I think really to enjoy and understand, you know, the fabric of French life, you'd have to speak the language. And the other thing is, there is still this issue with photographing people in France. You know, obviously if you're going in and doing a portrait, you can ask for consent, even if you don't have it signed. But generally speaking, you know, when I did my Paris book, I was very worried that there'd be someone coming along trying to sue us, because when those new laws in France were first employed, there were a lot of people putting cases against Magnum photographers. So I'm quite happy just sort of staying in the UK and coming over here.
It's basically our lawyers who were very bad at defending the photographers. But
yeah. So that's really why I would never really consider, beyond doing something about Paris, to do a book about the French bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them.
I will challenge you on that one of these days. I think it's an interesting project. What are you working on at the moment? I understand, maybe you should tell us a bit more about the foundation. I understand, which is a very generous action of yours. Mm-hmm. If I understand well, you sold your book collections to the Tate Modern, and from that you invested into creating this foundation in Bristol, where you live. What was your option in creating this foundation for British photographers, and also sitting it in Bristol and not in London?
Well, first off, you know, I'm a great believer in British documentary photography. I think it's very underrated. We don't have the same generosity from the art world towards photography that France enjoys. So, you know, it means that many of my photographer friends who are very good haven't really been able to sell prints or have a career. I've been very lucky, I acknowledge that. So I've been able to reinvest some of the money that I'd earned by buying and acquiring prints from my sort of peer group. And then I decided to make this more of a formal thing. And in 2017, we finally got this building, which we bought through the foundation and kitted it out. And we now have the foundation up and running. We do 4 shows a year. We have a very good bookshop. We do talks. We do seminars. And for me, it is going to be part of my legacy, and I'm very happy to have got it going. I've also, of course, the archive of my own work is preserved within the foundation, and you know, this is a thing that many photographers don't really get around to thinking about. What's going to happen to their work when they're dead? Basically, is it going to be sold? Is it going to be put in a skip? You know, so I didn't want to lumber. We only have one daughter. I didn't want to lumber her with the task of having to sort out this whole thing, and it's been a great success. We have a wonderful membership. You know, our talks are very well frequented, and people like your good self come. And we have a great library. We have all the magazines from photography. We have Picture Post. We have Creative Camera. We have 10/8, and so we want to really make it a research sort of centre as well for British photography, where people can come and look at prints, look at books, look at magazines, and learn more about the history of British photography.
Talking about British photography, I mean, you always claim that you were kind enough to say that Henri Cartier-Bresson was one of your studies on your study list when you were a student in Manchester, but you always said that Tony Ray Jones was the most influential for you. How much do you think you followed the tracks of Tony Ray Jones?
Yeah, so Tony Ray Jones is a brilliant photographer who did, in the late 60s, an incredible amount of work in the UK, and it was published as a book, I think, just after his death. He died very young, at the age of 30, in something like, I don't know, when was it, 1982, something like that. Anyway, I bought this book. Someone had visited Manchester Polytechnic while I was studying photography to talk about Tony Jones. And immediately I was taken in by this work. And I guess if there's one photographer I've tried to follow, it would be him. And we've now collected work by him, vintage prints. I went through his whole contact prints and found new pictures, which also got published and shown in London. So yes, I'm very friendly with Anna Ray Jones, his widow, who is still alive and well. So he's all part of the sort of people and photographers that not only have inspired me, but that we try and collect and house in our foundation too.
Is the role of the foundation also to project this kind of work abroad from England?
I guess our priority is really to show it in the UK. I mean, we haven't really got the staff or the inclination to go around and try and tour these exhibitions. If anyone ever sees one and wanted to take it, we'd obviously work out a way of doing that. But no, it's not our priority.
So are you saying that the foundation is about British photographers, that you don't send exhibitions abroad? And
also photographers.
And that sounds like very much like Brexit.
Well, yeah, you could look at it like that. But also we collect... Well, let me finish. We also collect images taken by foreign photographers in the UK. I mean, in a sense, you have to do limitations, otherwise you can't do everything. So, with photographic books, I go around Paris Photo, I saw all these books which are interesting, but before, when I was really building up the collection, I would have to buy them, because they'd be part of the collection. Now I can just bypass them all. I can look at them and get inspired and see that's a good book, and if it's exceptional, I would consider buying it. But other than that, we just have to limit ourselves because it's just too much to try and take on the whole world. It's like, you're limited to the work of Cartier-Bresson. Well, that's not a problem, is it?
No, but we just show him in Rabat, Morocco, in Taipei, and other places. That's what we're about. Yeah. And Henri said from day one that the place in Paris should be for other photographers prior to his work. So.
Likewise, my foundation, I've only done one show.
We have a lot of similarity.
I've only done one show of my own work, although we're doing the second one next year, in fact.
When will it be?
And we hope to have the Cartier-Bresson reconciliation show come to us.
We'll love. What will be a show next year?
It's a new book I've just published called Chew Stoke. So in 1992, I was commissioned by the Telegraph magazine to spend a year photographing and documenting one village. And this village, it was like 12 kilometers from Bristol, so I could go to it very easily. And we had a writer who was very good, I'd worked with before. And we would go there regularly, and I would photograph every event, did lots of portraits. So by the end of the year, I could almost knock on any house, and people would sort of welcome you in. And this work was published in a magazine. We had an exhibition in the village hall, and people came the day before it was published. We gave everyone a free magazine, and it was a great event. And recently we've just done another slideshow in the village hall to introduce the book. We sold the book. So in fact there's a talk this afternoon at Paris Photo about Chew Stoke, and then a book signing at Clementine de la Faria Gallery in Paris Photo, about 4 o'clock, something like that.
I must say you've been one of the first photographers to go beyond just taking pictures. I mean, you had pictures in the streets of London, in the subway, before many did so, and you always interacted, did this kind of
shows on beaches, which you saw.
The show on beaches, on the M1, on the table of the cafeterias, when people stopped to have a cup of coffee driving up north or south, whichever. So you've been very...
well, I'm very keen on this different ways of getting photography out into society.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
do you still collect postcards?
Not really, no, because I guess my postcard collecting has, I've got to where I've got, and I don't really need any more. I've got other priorities now.
Okay. We're going to go to questions in the room, if you have any, or if someone wants to be the first one, usually there's more afterwards. But we have a microphone somewhere? Yeah, here we have a microphone. Thank you, Cecilia. We'll take the opportunity to thank your team that worked with our team and did a great job in getting these shows together on time and sharpening up. Yes, we have a question down here. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne parle pas très bien anglais, donc est-ce que vous pourriez répéter en français? Où est la fondation? Est-ce que c'est ouvert?
Oui, bien sûr. Je suis désolé, mais on avait annoncé que le débat serait en anglais, donc je me doutais qu'il y aurait un peu de difficultés à comprendre pour certains qui seraient peut-être échappés. Pardon pour ça. La fondation est à Bristol, dans un quartier industriel. The question is, where is the foundation? Because the lady doesn't speak English enough.
Yeah.
She missed that.
People can join, subscribe and get the newsletter of what we're doing free of charge, of course. And we have a very good bookshop full of all those Martin Parr books, all signed, sadly all signed, but available.
Donc la fondation est à Bristol, dans un quartier industriel où ils fabriquaient de la peinture avant. Et donc tous les bâtiments sont peints de haut en couleur. Et juste en face, il y a la Royal Photographic Society anglaise qui a déménagé de Bath, qui était un peu plus loin que Bristol, jusqu'à Bristol. Donc ils sont face à face. Donc c'est un voyage qui vaut la peine, d'une part parce que toutes ces villes sont merveilleuses. Et que là vous avez un quartier photographique qui est en train de se construire. Oh, depuis longtemps. Absolument. Ouais. Que vous pouvez vous inscrire sur sa mail list et commander ses livres signés en direct. Et qui a également. There's also quite a few films about the work of Martin on his site. Quite a few fun films.
Oh yeah,
as well.
we also have a series of interviews that I do on a couch. It's on YouTube. You go to Martin Parr Foundation Sofa Sessions. We have like 23, 24 at the moment. Interviews, 20 minutes long, not too long.
But do you have a shrink with you? Or?
No. So if anyone's interested in hearing about famous British photographers, this is a great opportunity.
No, it's not about your frustration as a kid on the beach.
No, that's I saved that for talks.
Une autre question? Another question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're saying that you never made a book about French people in Paris because of some issues with the people, if they are okay to be taken a picture of, etc. And you said that's different in England, but why don't you need to ask their consent there? And because in most of your photos, it almost looks like you're invisible, like as a photographer, that you can penetrate everywhere between people, and they seem pretty fine with it, and they don't pay attention. So for me, it was so fascinating and surprising. So that's why I wanted to ask how it was actually happening.
So first off, I mean, in the UK, you can still photograph anyone on the street and do anything you like with it, apart from advertising, completely legally. You cannot do that in France. If someone could complain and say, I didn't give you consent, and potentially try and sue the photographer. I don't know if this happens much. What do you think?
There's a lot to say about this. In France, the problem came when Robert Doisneau I knew Robert Doisneau pretty well when that happened, and when Robert Doisneau allowed people to think they were all the people kissing in front of the Hotel de Ville, and people, the three people that started to claim they want a share of what Doisneau has earned with that picture all his life. Three different people. Though Doisneau pretty well knew that, because he did the picture, that these were models taken. And it's actually, if you look at contact sheets, they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth till it has the right picture. But Doisneau has a great sense of humor, and he enjoyed the idea that everyone would recognize itself till the time it became a problem. And so everyone seeing himself or herself on the picture would start to claim at court. And unfortunately, we had very bad lawyers who were not at all prepared to fight this, and many cases were lost, or even worse, before it went to court, the magazines in which the pictures would be published would pay whatever money for not going to court. And that created a French specificity that all photographers now think it's dangerous to take pictures in France. It's not true, but it's a rumor. And there's been some cases lost by photographers, that's true, but it's not kind of a tsunami about it. So there's more rumor, there's more fuss about it than reality, and it's really French specific. But one question I want to ask you is also that Henri Cartier-Bresson was hiding himself not to be recognized by people he would photograph. That's not the case at all. I mean, and you're now a very serious guy because Our Lady, the Queen, has made you officer or commander of the British Empire. So how come you're not a celebrity? How come people, what's your relationship with people? Do they recognize you in the street?
Occasionally. Let me first finish the question from this lady here. I mean, I have a technique of photographing on the street. It's very difficult for me to describe, but I don't face, you know, if there's someone I'm interested in photographing, my body isn't facing them. And I might swing around, take the picture, and then often that's with flash, so people might notice. And then someone will look up, and because I'm not looking at them, and most photographers look at them looking guilty, okay? So I don't actually look guilty, I'm looking at something else. So that's a technique that I've sort of learned to play with over the years. So it's always been very beneficial to me. Now, what was your question? Sorry.
I admire that you take pictures without looking at your subject.
Yeah, no, I do look at the subject. I'm just swimming around quickly. It's the body language that really counts. That's how you can help to sort of camouflage what you're doing.
No, my question was about celebrity.
Oh, yes. No, I do
that thing that Henri feared, to be recognized.
Right. Now, I guess if I go out shooting, 2 or 3 people a day might come and say hello, and they're usually other photographers. You know, the general public have no real interest. They might get angry, by the way, because one of the things that does happen is people do confront you, and they say, oh, it's illegal to take my picture, which it isn't, of course. And the great thing about digital now, you know, I can show them a frame, and if it's a useless frame, which most of them are, because most of the time I'm taking very bad pictures, waiting for the good ones to finally emerge, I'll just delete it and move on, because there's plenty more fish in the sea, as they say.
Une autre question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Over there? Yeah.
So yeah.
Where are you? Wave.
I'm here.
On the right. Yeah.
So the question was, I'm very curious about in the last 10 years, 15 years with the iPhones coming up, people have become more accustomed to getting photographed or, I don't know, being the subject of a photograph. In your career, what do you think like these 10 years have changed for you photographing that subject? And how do you feel the subject is changing through time as we get used to photographs?
I think the introduction of the smartphone has probably been the biggest change in society that I've witnessed in the last 20 years. You know, we're always on them now. You know, selfies, of course. I've done a book about people doing selfies because I thought it was such an interesting thing. Selfie sticks seem to be in decline. Is that right? Would you think that? Yeah, they've had their moment. It's going down. So things like that really, I like ephemeral ideas. You know, that really amuses me. But I think the quality of the smartphone is remarkable. And for example, you can, if you want to photograph on the street with a smartphone, you can just look at the viewfinder down there. You know, much less suspicious. And as the quality gets better and better, there may well come a day where I'll just ditch my DSLR and go to the smartphone. But I still want to make a print that's 1 meter by 1.5 meters size. You know, like you'll see at the Paris Photo, for example. And to do that, you really do need a big file. So you can't quite yet do that with an iPhone, but soon it'll happen, I think.
It'll happen, yes, probably.
Yes, yeah. Just around the corner.
We're going to go for a last question, if you have one.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, where are you?
I'm here. I'm over here at the back. Here,
I've got 2 hands up, so I don't know. Okay, over there.
No worries. Yes,
so we'll take you afterwards, and then we'll stop. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yes, so Britain's a bit of a mess at the minute. You've got like financial crisis, Brexit, political storms everywhere, potentially Scottish independence. do you still have other stories you still want to tell?
Well, I agree with you. The crisis in Britain is a total mess. You know, all triggered by Brexit, basically, and everything since then has gone. Even and the ridiculous Tory government. We just had that Prime Minister who was in for 6 weeks, as you know, who did a crazy sort of financial reconvention that just didn't work. So, yeah, I mean, so will it all change? I mean, it's very difficult to actually photograph the cost of living sort of crisis apart from going, say, to a food bank or going back to sort of photographing people looking cold in their sort of sitting room. So it's not the type of work that I do. I'm interested in the leisure pursuits of the Western world, and despite all the problems we have, that sort of thing is still going on strong. You know, I was out this summer photographing, and everything was crowded, everything was out there. So that's really what I like to photograph. But you're absolutely right, we're in a total mess at the moment, which is why it's nice to be in France.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for a very interesting talk today. I've learned a lot about your work and the foundation. Very specific question. You have one of your many exhibitions in Paris at the moment is in the Irish Cultural Centre, and I was a bit, we went there yesterday to have a look at it, and I was a bit puzzled by the caption under a couple of the photographs, which were taken in 1979 at the time of the Pope's visit, and the caption stated that it was the Pope said Mass in the Phoenix Park, but the two photographs were taken in the west of Ireland.
Right, so that's obviously a mistake we need to rectify. I'm sorry about that. Apologies. But yes, the introductory picture, I believe, is Phoenix Park, and then there are two pictures from Knock, which I also went to, and they're obviously being miscaptioned. Please accept my apologies. I'm glad to see you're on the case with details. It's well observed.
At least the captions were big enough you could read them, because it's not always the case in museums. So.
And thank you for the plug for the Irish show. Please go and see it. It's on at the Irish Cultural Centre. And it's the book that accompanies it, which is nearly sold out. They still have some at Damiani's stand. Is called From the Pope to a Flat White. The idea being that in 1979, I photographed the Pope visiting Ireland. At that point, 2/3 of the Irish population went to see the Pope. Catholicism has really declined, and now, because of the internet sort of companies that have their European headquarters in Dublin, it's become a very gentrified city, it's become a wealthy country, and if you like, a flat white is a personification of gentrification. So in between those two dates, 2019 and 1979, I've frequently gone back to Ireland, and the pictures in the exhibition show different stages of its transformation. And it's difficult to imagine a country that's changed more in the last 40 years than Ireland. I mean, now you had a gay tea shop, Prime Minister, you can have abortion, you have gay weddings. I mean, it'd be impossible to think of that back in the 80s, for example.
It doesn't rain anymore?
No, it still rains. Yeah, that's one thing that hasn't changed at all, is the weather. But, you know, in our global world...
That's a good picture, right?
Well, no, but I'm saying the countries like Britain and Ireland that have lots of rain, we're going to be the new superpowers because everywhere else is going to run out of water. Even in France this summer.
Well, don't tell China. Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to stop here this conversation. And thank you very much, Martin, for taking the time. We're going to move. We're going to move to the foundation, number 79, the street. If you want to have direct interference with Martin or get book signings, we're going to be sitting there for the next half an hour, I guess. It's not.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll be there. Thank you very much for coming this morning, and thank you for understanding English.
Get your portrait in the book.